We're inside over here, nice and cozy. I want to begin by thanking Alan, who's out in the back from Alex Theatre, for once again opening the doors to us for YJP. We're no stranger here, we've been here many times. We love coming over here, and if anybody ever wants to come over here, they've got extraordinary venues out in the back, great theatres. If you want to put on a concert for 500 people, this is a place to come. So don't be shy to visit over here, and they're always open. I want to welcome our extraordinary, wonderful panel, each one of them very, very dear friends of mine, in no specific order, just work this way. I had the privilege of meeting Damon on a trip to Israel. We spent some quality time together. We were told what happens in Israel stays in Israel, so I can't tell you all the secrets. But Damon is a senior journalist for The Australian. You might have seen a great article in The Australian 2 weeks ago, probably his best piece to date.
Wow.
That's meant to get a laugh, guys. You clearly haven't seen it. And but thank you, Damon, for coming along tonight. Carol is no stranger. She's spoken before for YGP. She's spoken for Chabad Campus. And Carol, thank you, a very dear friend who is always readily available, always happy, always says yes. It took me 3 years to get yes, and then after 3 years, it's always been yes. So that's a secret, it's a good secret to life. Never accept no as an answer. No just means not yet, because eventually you'll come to a stage where it says yes, and then it's yes. So Carol, thank you. Thank you for coming. Oh, thank you. There you go. And finally, my very dear friend Peter, who's also no stranger to YJP. Peter has spoken. This is his third YJP event. We did one in the city a couple of years ago. We did one over Zoom together with Carol. And now back over here, irresistible. You just have to be back for YJP. But Peter, thank you. Peter and I spent a solid day driving together a couple of weeks, more than a couple of weeks ago now. But Peter is an extraordinary friend of our organization, and thank you, Peter, for coming out. So thank you to each and every single one of you. YJP is here to engage, it's here to involve, it's here to inspire, and we've got events non-stop. This is the beginning of a 4-week marathon of workshops. Next week, the week after, find us. The information is all online. And on your chair, you'll find this cool, beautiful book. Written by Damon. I can't say I've read it. I wish I can, but I can tell you that I will be reading it over the next week or so.
Well, can I say I've read it, and I actually had the very great honour of launching it, and it's a fabulous book. Damon has really good insights and writes profiles about business people in quite a unique way, so I can really encourage people to read that.
There you go. And I will say, Damon won't be upset with me. If you ever, you should buy a subscription to The Australian, but if you are, make sure you buy it on Damon's article. Critical, you hear? So don't just buy a subscription, buy it, even if you cancel it after. I'm not suggesting you should, but just buy it under Damon, okay? That's all you've got to do, okay? It just lifts up the stats, and that's what we're trying to do. We're here to support one another. So you've heard enough from me. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together to welcome our extraordinary founder.
Do you guys want to hold yours? It's just, people will be able to hear better if you can grab the mouse. Hi everybody, I'm Damon. Thanks so much for having me along. It's a real privilege to be with such a unique group, so really looking forward to the next 50 minutes or so. I've known these two for probably a decade, I would say. We've done stories together in the press. We've done private projects together. We've both of them have really become friends. So it's a real honour to be playing referee between them tonight. And they're both just amazing business people. The enterprises that they both run are so different, and that's why you'll find the perspectives amazing tonight. But it's been a real privilege to know them. So let's get on with it. We're talking about life in the post-COVID world, and hopefully it's post-post. You never quite know the way things go every day at the moment, but we hope that we're resuming normality. Let's see how the rest of the year goes. But we're looking at the outlook for business, investments, work culture, other issues. I'll start with a sort of provocative one, and I'll throw it to Peter to start. do you think, Peter, that our mindsets have changed post-COVID? That are we less willing to compromise on a lot of things in a post-pandemic world? Have we learnt that we shouldn't be standing still? I guess, capture something of the Israel culture. I was there in May, and it's absolutely intoxicating, as you said. Just people are in a rush. They want to do things. Are we seeing that in a post-pandemic world, do you think?
Hello, everyone, and thank you to everyone. I'd start with myself. I'm probably one of those unusual people that loved lockdown and COVID. And I guess because I could sit behind my desk on the computer and sort of bang out emails and Zoom calls until 11 o'clock at night and start at 7 o'clock in the morning, and everyone was around. So it started, I guess, certainly for the Victor Smorgon group, a culture of actually more collaborative than less. In a broader sense, what I am seeing is less compromise in business dealings, in people taking on roles, in things that are a little bit left of centre. And I think that goes to investments as well. Everyone. It seems that more people are following each other, and if you look at the stock market and days on the stock market, there's significantly more correlating days when 100% of stocks are up or 100% of stocks are down. I think that really comes back to that people are looking to be with other people of their similar ilk and similar views, and that puts in a position of not necessarily considering other people's views. And I think that has been accelerated post-COVID.
And just on that, like you say in a transaction, do you see people are less willing to compromise than perhaps they were before for the sake of, yeah?
I think there's a lot more box checking.
Right.
And a lot more, so I want to say solid positions, not quite the right terminology, but people standing their ground on not necessarily reasonable things, and feeling that that's an acceptable position rather than trying to find a solution.
So what do you see, Carol, in your world on that front?
Well, I should also say hi to everyone and thank you for coming out on cold, wet night. And like Peter, I really enjoyed lockdown, which was sort of bizarre. But not having to go to social events at night, for example, it's interesting actually, because that 7 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock at night was true for a while, until I realised that I was absolutely run ragged, because you didn't have to travel to meetings anymore. You didn't have to speak to people in between meetings. And I'm sure we all found this, that, I was in meetings every hour on the hour, and that had to stop because my eyes were going square, and I actually was not thinking as well as I normally do, because I didn't have that time for reflection. And I think we all went through that when COVID first hit, that, you realised that you could actually do 12 meetings a day instead of 6. And I think we all tried that, and it sort of didn't work so well after a while. And then we sort of started to cut back. And I guess just for a bit of background, I should tell you that I'm involved very much in our family office, which is a very entrepreneurial family office. But I also chair a listed company, Equity Trustees, and I'm also on the Reserve Bank board. So I guess I have different milieus that I operate in, that I've sort of seen different types of reactions and impacts of COVID. And I'll share with you the feedback that we got from our private equity investor partners through COVID, which was really interesting. So when COVID first hit, I think everyone went into a real damage control, which was, it was really scary, right? Nobody knew what was going to happen. No one knew if we were, if this was like a bubonic plague and we were all going to die, right? And particularly, you saw from from what happened in the stock market, from what happened with the banks, what happened with the government. I mean, the reactions were incredibly strong and incredibly forceful. But things started to even out quite quickly. Within 3 months, I think people started to become a lot more, a lot less frightened, I should say, and things started to, within a COVID context, normalise. But we had at the time, I think, 8 or 9 portfolio businesses that we stayed incredibly close to. And much to our surprise, it was, for most of them, and not all of them, but for most of them it was business as usual. But us standing side by side with them and collaborating and working together and supporting each other was really what saw us through. So maybe our experience was a little bit different to yours because the collaboration was very close. The compromise was also happening because, of course, compromise had to be made because we couldn't operate as business as usual. There had to be compromises. And I think as we've emerged from COVID, things have just gone from strength to strength, to be absolutely honest. And I think that in a way, the collaboration, the relationship building, the opportunity that we had to relate somewhat differently to each other through the COVID crisis actually strengthened relationships and made it a lot stronger going forward.
What are the good things that have happened to your working day, would you say, from COVID? How has it changed for the better, if it has, or has it gone back to what it was?
Flexibility. People are so much more flexible about not having in-person meetings, which works so much better. I mean, particularly if you've got interstate obligations.
Or overseas.
Pardon?
Or overseas.
Or overseas, absolutely. People are so comfortable now on Zoom, and it's sort of funny, I guess, like if you think about, sci-fi movies of 20 years ago, people were talking to each other on screens, right? Quite comfortably, and well, that's the world we're now living in. And I think that flexibility and acceptance about, actually, I'm not coming to Sydney for that meeting, I'll join by Zoom, has been a fantastic thing for me. I mean, it means I'm on planes less. I don't know how that is.
And how's it helped you? And I guess to put you on the spot, and I'd like you to answer this too, but I'll ask Peter first. How do you decide what's a meeting that you do face-to-face now versus one that you don't? Because I've got an answer for that too, but maybe I won't give mine. But
I mean, I would agree with you, Carol. For me, I was on a plane overseas every 6 or 8 weeks, and then interstate every week or second week. That kind of just stopped, which was a real positive, I must say. Other than that, I mean, I guess certainly my work life also changed a little bit in that running a family business with a lot of stakeholders, you have a lot more people that were not necessarily at work or doing the things that they do normally, and were very inquisitive about, I guess, where we were at this point in time and what we were doing in the future. So, we've embarked on a whole sort of program ourselves of thinking about, certainly for the Smorgon group, the 4th generation and onboarding 4th generation members and the like.
So people were more questioning, you would say, than what they were before?
A bit more nervous, so therefore more interested.
Right.
And the time to be interested.
Yep. That's not a bad thing then.
It's not a bad thing at all, and that really forced a lot of change, or made us consider change about how, what did we think, and maybe that was me also, getting over 50 and having a midlife crisis around, I'm going to die in a second, so I've got to sort it out for the kids.
You're entering your best decade.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, your second question?
Oh no, I was just in terms of how do you decide what is a face-to-face and what's not?
I think it's still very important to sit in front of people. But I think now, in my own, in my own world, I'm doing it every 3 months rather than every month. So it still becomes very important to have those face-to-face meetings and relationships, but just not as often.
Yeah. How's it work for you?
I was going to ask you, how's it work for you?
Well, it's an interesting question because COVID's been a real bonus for a journalist from a, to put it bluntly, transactional point of view. And when you are doing a quick interview, before I would have to, I live down the Bay, so I'd go into town on a train, sit there, put a tape recorder in front of someone, go home, go through the pleasantries or whatever, take out 3 hours of your day, and now I can do that at my computer in probably 20 minutes because they're often just 20-minute discussions. But on the other side of the ledger and what's in that book, the big personal interviews that I do, which I've done with both of these people, you have to do those face-to-face because it's very hard to get the human dynamic and to be able to listen properly and to get that human experience that you need to do those interviews and write them properly by doing them over Zoom. I mean, I'm getting better at it, I must say, because I had to. And some have actually been quite remarkable. But, I mean, the one that we did was a great example just the other week that was in the paper where I spent, 3 hours with Sam Terestio and his wife down at their home on the Mornington Peninsula, and to be able to get that, and in the middle of it, it's on the public record in that article, Sam says, oh, well, my son had a stroke last year, and then suddenly starts talking about how horrible that was and whatever, and you really have to build that trust in that environment to get them to have the confidence to tell you that on the public record, and that's, it's very hard to do that over a Zoom. So.
But that is your strength, I have to say. You have as I've said, you have a very unique style of bringing particularly business people out and to life.
But it's hard to do that over a computer.
Yeah, but as I
said, you've got to adapt and
exactly.
You've got to know. At the end of the day, it comes down to the questions as well that you ask. So, yeah.
Yeah. So.
You can't get out of your answer.
No,
yes.
No, I'm happy to answer it. And in fact, it's interesting because this is. I'll sort of answer in the context of being the chairman of a publicly listed company, because we've had our last 2 AGMs online, which have been fantastic. We've actually had more engagement with shareholders because we're Melbourne-based, and yet we've got shareholders from all around the country who don't usually attend the meetings when they're physical. But over Zoom, they've all been attending, which has been fantastic. And I was absolutely shocked that this year we've been told by the ASX that we cannot have a meeting online, that it has to be either a hybrid, which I do not like. I do not like hybrid meetings at all, and particularly as a chairman, or in person, which I think is absolutely ludicrous. And I think it's going to be only a matter of time before meetings are able to be on Zoom in the sort of the ASX rules or whatever.
It is interesting. I'll be provocative though as a journalist. I love going to a proper AGM because...
Oh, that's for the free scones.
It depends on the company. If you go to the Penfolds ones, it's better than scones. But the problem is for a journalist is... the best thing in an AGM is actually to go up to the chairman and the directors after and talk to them, not sit there through the public part of it.
But you can do that anytime.
Not necessarily.
Yes,
It depends. Well, maybe I can, but there are plenty of younger journalists who don't have the relationships that can't. And I know when I was starting out, I used to go to AGMs all the time because I was forced to. That was what my editor told me to do. And some of the people I would meet after the meeting to go up to the chairman or whatever, who I would never get within cooey of through the walls of PR armies of people that blocked you. It was really a powerful experience.
But with respect, I actually think that the accessibility of chairman and board directors now is probably different to what it was 10 years ago. I think you've got a new generation coming through that don't necessarily adopt the same practices of the old boy network that was alive and well 10 years ago.
In some ways, that's debatable.
I know that the women who are non-executive directors and chairs are incredibly accessible, open and transparent.
Yes, I totally agree with that. But that's not absolutely universal. So, but we won't get into a debate about that because that's all we'll talk about for the next hour. A couple of nuts and bolts issues I want to ask you about because you both know them very well. Property, you both been involved in that or continue to be involved in it. Peter, what are you seeing in the property market in the post-COVID world? How has it changed? What worries you? What's the opportunities?
I guess, so just a little bit of background. 1999, we built a mortgage business, sold it 2006, and then went into partnerships, ran 7 different partnerships in development, property, mainly residential. Our journey was probably a pre-COVID thing than a post-COVID thing, to be honest. We found that the larger developments, it was already difficult to sell sort of residual apartments. I always say that when you're doing a 500 apartment development, you feel great when you sold 350 until you realise you've got 150 that you still have to sell.
That's where your profit lies.
Yeah, the profit's in the last 30. So I guess for us, we were already winding down that program, and I guess during COVID, it's been really interesting to see the split between single family home and apartment and the value shift in that. I guess a lot of people haven't seemed to recognise it, that I think there was 399,000 Australians that came home during COVID.
Wow.
And so standard immigration, I think, is 190,000 people. Mm-hmm. Well, in 2002, in 2020, I think there was 399,000 Australians that came home, and the majority were obviously expats and wanting to live in a home rather than an apartment. And so it was interesting to see that shift from single family or from apartment to single family home. From our investment basis, we started to look at more experiential travel. This issue of COVID and people not being together and potentially wanting to be together. And you saw it during lockdown with the Golden Sheep Hotel in Double Bay that was in the news, when they opened in Sydney for one day and all of a sudden there was lines of 200 people outside. And that was really kind of quite instructive as to where people want to get together, how they want to get together. And so for us, in Australia, we kind of converted our portfolio, and one of our projects we've just completed in Sorrento, the Continental Hotel.
That looks fabulous.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's always a struggle to get it up and going.
Yeah, we've got a place on the Great Ocean Road. Can you do something in Angles?
Well, I think Justin Helms did.
Yeah,
yes, or Paul Little.
So that was very much driven by this thought of people wanting to get together and have an experience, affordable luxury, potentially less travel, and that affected our property portfolio. I guess the flip side of that is we substantially moved our portfolio to the States, in the multifamily asset class in the States, and also underutilised office space. And have been running quite a large program there across, mainly in the East Coast, but following job markets, and lots of opportunity to take unloved assets, unloved family legacy assets, and run a corporate overlay. Take an apartment, a condo, I guess, that's renting for $1,200 a month. Spend $2,000 to $5,000 on it, get an extra $50 a week rent, and the occupancy will run from 82% to 96%.
Whereabouts in America, Peter?
Really, all across. So I'm just thinking, Hartford, Connecticut. At the moment, we're doing a hotel conversion. The Marriott Hotel closed down that had a convention centre. Beautiful hotel, pools, convention centre. We've halved the number of rooms, turned them into apartments, and made effectively a sub-regional shopping centre in the old convention centre. and that sort of thing we can roll out at still 10 to 15% below market on a rental basis.
Do you have partners?
We do.
Right.
We do.
Okay.
I mean, we've been operating that market since 2002, but it's really ramped up now.
Were you at all worried when there was the move out of cities through COVID?
Not really, because we weren't involved. We didn't have that much residential in cities.
Right.
But we have been hit, certainly some of the office buildings, some of the legacy assets, particularly in Manhattan. We built a hotel in Hyatt House, which occupancy disappeared.
Yeah.
We had the great fortune of what do they call them? The National Guard moved in and took all the roofs. Other interesting ones, holiday houses that we had built in partnership with a company called Villatel in Orlando, where we kind of expected 65-70% occupancy. Again, everyone started to move.
Yeah.
And they would take rental for 6 months, move the whole family down to Orlando, large infrastructure facilities.
So come back here just to talk about risk. Your mezzanine portfolio, I believe, is basically down to zero. Is that right? And then secondly, with the developers falling over that we've seen, builders rather than developers. Yeah, what does that mean for a property developer? I mean, can you get a builder now to finish a project? So, sorry, the first question first. So I keep on asking them in twos.
So here, I guess we've been able to take opportunity where people have fallen over. Yeah. So that's always primarily what we're looking for. Well, not primarily, but it's always interesting when people have started a project. A lot of people get scared away. I guess our view is if you do the work, it's not that hard to step in. And the Continental Hotel was exactly that situation, where the developer and the builder had gone broke. It was a building that they dug the basement effectively. So we were happy to step in. From a mezzanine finance point of view, yes. Again, we saw that a lot of people were raising a lot of money, and the risk margin was reducing quite significantly. And a company like ours is always doing really an IRR comparison between different asset classes. So we'll say, well, do we want to invest in mezzanine finance or in a blueberry farm? I know they're completely different and nothing to do with each other.
But where are you getting the returns?
But where are we getting the returns from, and how do we need to be flexible? I think probably the other thing that we keep trying to look at is, because we have residual apartments, this issue of values, and when those values will come back, and how immigration affects that as well, which has been a massive COVID effect.
That's going to be fundamental for them. So how about your portfolio of property and what you've seen?
Well, I actually haven't worked in property for a long time now. I mean, it is my background, but I haven't worked in it for a long time. But Alan and I had a very interesting experience developing a 5-star hotel in Hobart. And this is Chatham House rules, so I'll just say to anyone
There's a journalist in the room.
who's tempted at all to do business which involves the Tasmanian government, don't, because they were an absolute nightmare to deal with. Notwithstanding that, we because we're not, I guess, in the property business, we decided that we would sell that asset, and we sold it in 2021.
December last year.
Yeah, 2021, and we got an incredible price for it. Notwithstanding, I think it was probably counterintuitive because we were still in the pandemic and no one knew how we were going to emerge, so who wanted to buy a hotel? But we were lucky because there was a super fund that's actually based in Tasmania, which obviously makes a lot of sense because, as we know, superannuation funds take a very long-term view, right? And this hotel is a stunning hotel run by the Marriott Group, which is a fantastic group to deal with. I have to say they were fabulous throughout the whole process. And and it's doing very, very well. I can highly recommend it if you do go down to Hobart. It's called the Tasman. It's absolutely gorgeous and a great Italian restaurant. But my background is more retail property, and I was really interested to read in the Financial Review this morning the interview with Peter Allen, who's the outgoing CEO of the Centre Group, which of course is all the Australian Westfield centres, where he talks about how the centres are really coming back, the foot traffic, that the revenues are going back up, the negotiations with the retailers are much more evenly balanced now, and then I read further down an interview with Ruslan Kogan, whose business has gone from being valued at 2.6 billion 2 years ago to 365 million now, which is absolutely incredible, which I think shows where people and how people were shopping through the pandemic, and then now how we're sort of reverting back to pre-pandemic shopping habits. But I'm sure that there will be some sort of rebalance.
Yeah, it's interesting, Carol, because I was looking at an email from a retail operations on Monday, and I think the Afterpay day was last week. If anyone knows.
Yeah, right.
Didn't do anything for us.
What do you mean by that, sorry?
I guess we usually see a large bump in sales for these discount days. You know, being a retailer these days is always interesting because everyone's stealing your margin with every app that, you know, we all kind of log in.
We should just say your retail asset is...
well...
yeah, that's actually a difficult question.
We own General Pants Group since 1995. So 26, 27 years in retail, and went through surf, dive and ski, jetty surf, transacted on that asset, and today we have Subi Jeans as well, which is a sort of a world jean brand. And so we just...
So how was your business, in the retail business, impacted through COVID?
COVID.
Did you have a good online, sort of facility?
We did. Online went from about 20 to 32%.
Wow.
Which made a real difference. And it's interesting, I'm just reflecting on what you said before. At the very beginning of COVID, yes, we were in exactly that same situation. You know, all hands on deck, trying to organise staff, and then reflecting on property, yes, trying to tell everyone that we're not going to pay any rent. And so we were kind of fighting on both sides of the coin as a landlord and as a tenant. So it was it was really interesting to see people's tactics and reflect on your own tactics, and I guess, all right, I tried that on, I didn't succeed, they're trying it on, you can kind of give them that sort of insight. But Afterpay Day, when Afterpay came into our business 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, it was really interesting. Online, it converted our average basket size from $72 to $132.
Wow.
And went to 40% of sales within probably the first 3 months. Just crazy. And so, I guess we always have this expectation that those sort of services will continue to grow and continue to facilitate our business. But it's just been interesting in the last week or two that hasn't been the case.
Wow. Now, you're both involved in venture capital investing, and that has been a real buzz of the moment in a post-COVID world, as Carol just mentioned, although Ruslan Kogan's not a venture capitalist, but he's been caught up in those valuation pullbacks. So how much do venture capital numbers at the moment worry you, and what are we going to see going forward in the portfolios that you have in your operations?
Shall I go first? Well, I guess my VC investing is quite separate to what we do in our family office in the context of growth equity or private equity. I probably started investing in early stage businesses probably about 15 years ago, and focusing on women entrepreneurs, because I'm not sure whether you know, but women only receive about 2% of venture capital funding and early stage funding, which is absolutely appalling. And so I've been investing in fabulous women entrepreneurs for the last 15 years. And I decided about 18 months ago, together with Alan, that we would actually have a somewhat different strategy, because we had about 12, you're actually playing more than a role as just a financial investor. You're also a mentor in many of the cases. And so we decided a year and a half ago that we would actually invest in women who are setting up VC funds. So women as investors, because I believe that the ecosystem is so skewed because there aren't enough women in investing. So we started looking for women who were setting up VC funds in Australia. Unfortunately, I've not found one.
Not one?
Not one. But I have found two fantastic Australian women who've set up on the west coast of the US, who are investing in women entrepreneurs in both the US and Australia, which is very exciting, and they are fantastic, and they both have technology backgrounds and have worked in venture capital and early stage businesses, so they really know what they're doing. I've invested in one on the east coast of the US, and I've invested in another smaller one on the west coast, and I'm talking to two fantastic women who are setting up VC funds in London, but I still have yet to find women who are setting up VC funds in Australia, and that's women only VC funds, because there are women who do work in VC.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, but they haven't set up the funds.
I mean, just on that point though, do you think the issues we talked about with COVID earlier in terms of accessibility, remote working, that sort of thing, will be an opportunity for women to play a greater role in that sector? And do you see any hope of that?
Well, I hope so. The issue again is access to funds, because you talk to men who have not set up a fund before, who don't have a track record, and for some reason they seem to be assessed very much on their potential or perceived potential in a way that women aren't, which is quite interesting. So the women who are setting up the VC funds are actually finding it very hard to attract capital. But I have been working actually with Nicola Forrest, who's also interested in this area, on changing the ecosystem, and watch that space.
Okay, interesting. So what do you, in terms of your private equity investments?
I was going to say, I am probably the exact opposite. I'm investing in hairy men in hard hats.
Why am I not surprised?
I guess for us, we never really played in the technology space. And it came from, I sat at the same desk as my grandfather for 15 years. And every time I started doing something on the computer, he'd say to me, "What the hell are you doing on the computer? Get your head out of that thing. Things happen outside, they don't happen in the box." And the other comment he always used to say to me was, "Who's paying for this?" So that kind of, I guess that influenced us for a long time. Just trying to understand, the cash flows and the like. And look, there's some great people around and people understand it very well. We're probably not one of those groups. We did more recently take an investment more in the digital asset space. For us, it's very much about efficiency. It's not really about the value of individual thing or another thing, but in the company that we invested in, ZeroCap, which is an Australian, effectively private bank in the digital asset space, we've been quite successful in introducing programs with large Australian corporates. Particularly, you may have seen in the paper around the Australian or ADC, which ANZ launched, which was basically an ANZ digital currency.
He hasn't mentioned the buzzword, it's crypto.
Well, I mean, that's the funny thing is it still takes a lot of explaining. When I think about it, someone explained it to me once that 35% of all employees in the United States were involved in trusted transfer, transferring an asset for compensation in one form or another. And if
can you give an example of that? Because I haven't heard that trusted transfer.
Your auditor,
Right.
the person that takes the money at the counter.
Right, okay.
You know, it really all the way through the channel that says I want something and I'm going to give something for it. And you may have also read recently in the paper ASX is sort of moving that way as well, and they've been struggling for 5 years to put programs in place, ultimately to move chess from I guess essentially paper based.
This is really blockchain.
But blockchain is digital.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess that's the problem with terminology.
Yeah.
But if you think about that transfer of shares, there's no real reason why you need to have T+2.
Yeah.
You know, that's just so it can get through the chain of trusted transfer.
Yeah, right.
But just to, no, it's okay. But just to be a bit provocative, like, you know, the crypto market has gone through a lot of turmoil. Tell me what keeps you in Zero Cap, and what's your view on where the market is going in this sort of this post-COVID shakeout?
I think the market ultimately is going the same way as the typing pool. You know, there was a very large typing pool at one point in time, and no one thought that would ever disappear. But ultimately,
that men would learn how to type.
100%.
Hey, I learned how to type very early.
Yeah, but you're a June.
Don't fall off the stage.
I just wanted you two to see each other.
That's fine. Sorry,
Crypto.
Yeah.
He keeps on wanting to avoid it, doesn't he?
No, I don't. So what do I think? I think ultimately things are moving that way, and it doesn't really matter the individual thing. In the same way as, you know, when we go to the ATM, you know, we don't know. Maybe you've seen that the machine is NCR, but you don't know that there's 10 different softwares throughout that chain that allows funds to be transferred from your card, you know, to cash coming out or to another organisation. But at one point in time, all of those were VC startups. The problem with crypto is you're valuing VC every 5 seconds, you know, because they're market facing. So, you know, I don't know everyone's experience in starting things up, but, you know, one day you're on top of the hill, and the next day you're in the river at the bottom of the hill, and the next day you might be halfway up the hill. So I think that if we talk about crypto in that way, there are over 15,000 different individual things that you could describe as crypto, and probably 13,000 of them is like collecting, you know, footy cards. People enjoy collecting footy cards, and they put a value on it, and I don't know.
But to use your hill analogy, you're really interested in the road that links the top of the hill and the bottom of the hill, the ecosystem, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, well, I think if you think of the previous success in the digital world, it was allowing people access in a more timely and easier fashion, you know, online purchases, Netflix for that matter, you know, or any of those types of things. They're just technologies that allow you to access whatever it is that you want to access. I think that crypto is that same thing. It's just that the things that people have purchased may or may not have value, and those values will fluctuate.
Which they do dramatically, as we're saying at the moment.
Yeah, but I mean, Australia's the central bank is looking at an Australian digital coin now. Yeah. Now, ultimately, yes, that may subjugate Bitcoin, probably not, but it won't Ethereum, because you still need those transfer rails. You know, now you have a thing. How do you transact in that thing? You still need all of the infrastructure and all of it.
That's what you're betting on.
You're
So,
right.
do you invest in crypto?
No. But I think that
Pretty definitive.
Yeah. I think that what the central banks are worried about is actually a parallel currency being created, and that will not happen. I think that central banks globally are going to make sure that if there is a digital currency, they in fact control it. I mean, it's a little bit like counterfeit and not counterfeit.
No,
Right?
I completely agree with you, and ultimately those people don't have the skill sets to develop that infrastructure. You know, I mean, even today, the Australian banks don't have that skill set to, you know, and can't hire the people because I guess, you know, their perception is they'd rather go to work in shorts and runners.
Yeah. So from the new world back to the old, I do just want to ask you about men in hard hats. Bear with us for 2 minutes. Commodities have gone through an amazing period, and you are in gold and copper. Why?
Yeah.
And what do you see as the opportunity in the months ahead for those assets?
I guess gold for us is quite simply every time in history where these sort of occurrences have occurred, gold has maintained its buying value or buying power. So we're not in a camp that says gold's going to $10,000. You know, it doesn't really matter as long as it maintains its buying power in an inflationary world. As a family, we thought the best way to do that would be actually to produce it ourselves, rather than just buy and put in the cupboard. So we sort of started on a journey of building a management team or participating in the building of a management team called Arate Capital, and ended up buying Stawell Gold Mine here in Victoria, which was in care and maintenance, had 12 people. Over the 18-month period, we built it up. We're now 260 people producing on a weekly basis. And that kind of informed our strategy further when we think about, you know, decarbonisation, for example. I was listening this morning. Currently, the copper market is 25 million tonnes. If we're going to meet Paris 2030 or 2050, that's going to take the world requirement to 50 million tonnes per year, which is a 3.6% annual growth, when in the last 30 years, the growth has only been at 1.2%. So, you know, it's quite simply, there's just not going to be enough copper. So, if we all go and buy electric cars and charging stations and turbines and solar panels and the like, there's just not enough resource in the world to actually achieve it all. And not only that, you're going back, sorry, getting into the weeds, but a fossil fuel will give you a conversion ratio of 30:1, input to output. Renewables give you a conversion ratio of 5:1. So just the amount of raw materials that are needed to actually, you effectively need 6 times as much raw material to achieve the same output. And that's probably that conversation around nuclear as well, because that's 100:1. And everything has its negativities and everyone has different opinions about things. So for us, we kind of looked at that and said, we can invest in a number of different ways, but given our experience in developing a small mine, what else can we do around the world in that respect?
How do you keep on top of everything? You are in so many diverse businesses.
I haven't mentioned half of them yet, Carol.
I have great people. And honestly,
You must have.
For us, it's a lot about partnerships. Whether they're partnerships with equity participants or partnerships with our staff. I guess we're always trying to encourage people to think about it as their own business and get to a point where they can manage it themselves.
So is that the common thread amongst your businesses, partnerships and collaboration?
Yes, very much so. Very much
So did you want to talk about decarbonisation as well in terms of your philosophy on that in the post-COVID world?
I think you should be getting Alan to speak about it, because he's very, as you would know, very, very passionate about that. And, we're looking at the exciting opportunities that are opening up now around the types of investments that can be made that are not only going to help decarbonise the planet and so therefore put us as, the human race into a much better position, but are also going to be incredibly profitable. So I think it's very exciting that we've now got a government that actually recognises what we need to do and how we need to move forward as a society, and who are actually going to participate as partners and collaborators and enablers in making sure that the investment opportunities are there, and of course the ESG results are all there.
And I think also, as we've seen in the media in recent days, the superannuation funds are ready and willing, I guess, in the right context to be involved.
Well, that'll be interesting though, because Paul Keating said that the superannuation funds have to have a social focus and perhaps deliver lower returns, which I think was very, very controversial.
Yeah, which hasn't been received
No.
particularly well.
As it probably shouldn't.
So just a few more minutes, I think, because looking at the clock. I do want to ask you before we finish, because you're so passionate about philanthropy, both of you. How do you think COVID has changed philanthropy? I know when I've spoken to you, Carol, before, you've talked about how difficult it was, I guess, for family foundations during COVID, and they dipped into their corpuses to make sure that the money was available. But what are we seeing, in the recent months? What are we going to see going ahead from? And you've obviously chairman of EQT, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, well, EQT, for example, has been delivering over $90 million in the last couple of years, which has actually been a huge amount of money. But I guess the emphasis or the focus has been on where that money can actually, the philanthropic dollars can make most difference. And I think that, there have been, notwithstanding JobKeeper and all the help from government, I think that there has been a lot of disadvantage over the last couple of years, which we're still dealing with. But I have to say, from a personal point of view, for me, philanthropy is about being able to really make a difference in a way where we see inequality happening. So, as you know, my philanthropic focus is around women and women's leadership and the inequality that women face in all sorts of ways. And one of the programs that I've been funding, which I'm very excited about, is called Pathways to Politics for Women, which is now in Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, Northern Territory, Canberra, and we're talking to South Australia. And this is really making a difference for women entering politics. So we have an alumni of 240 women, and we have 24 of them, that's nearly 10%, in elected office in various levels of government. And I think that when we actually achieve some sort of gender parity within our parliament, we'll actually see a different Australia going forward.
Thank you. And then what are you seeing on your philanthropic side, and how have things changed, if at all?
Honestly, the first thing I noticed was we don't carry coins around anymore. So anyone on the street, you feel, I wish they had an FPOS machine.
Yeah.
I think about that.
There's a business opportunity.
I honestly we think about that often. For us, it's been more community need. I guess the team's been focusing more on smaller individual community areas. I guess rather than larger institutions, and that's probably just been that's where the noise has been coming from. We're not as organised as some in terms of our process around what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. We're still a little bit kind of on first generation entrepreneurial in that respect. I did notice it was quite interesting during COVID, some organisations that were raising money because they didn't meet their budget, not because they were losing money. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to ask them, well, can you show me your P&L? And you'd look at it and they break even. You say, well, why are you just jumping on the bandwagon because You know, because everyone else is out saying they're losing money, you're saying you're losing money from your expected profit.
Yeah.
So well, you know, I guess there was a rationale to it, but we really had to come down and think about actual individual need. You know, what communities needed to be supported, certainly from our perspective, and it's quite egotistical, I guess, to have to make that decision, but they're the decisions we're presented with. Families, food, activities. I mean, you know, all types of activities, and just keeping people mentally healthy and physically healthy.
Okay, well, we're sort of at 8 o'clock. I don't know whether you want to have any questions from the audience or, if anybody's got anything they want to ask before we wind up. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Quick question for Carol. Where are interest rates going?
She can't answer that one. Otherwise, we all have to get locked in this room and not leave. So, have to pass on that one, sorry.
Not a number, just a thought.
You just have to look at her eyebrow. That's about the only clue that she'll give you.
Damon can answer that.
No, I'm no expert on that. Any others?
I knew someone would ask that question.
No other questions? Should just ask you if there isn't to finish, because the reason I've also enjoyed working with Carol and Peter is they're family businesses, essentially, at the end of the day. What do you think, just last question for both of you, you know, what's the most integral part of what makes your family business so successful, would you say? It's a big question, I know, but what's its secret sauce, do you think? Because I love writing about family businesses, because I just think the entrepreneurial spirit of what they do is so key, and they don't get caught up with. And Carol's been in public listed companies, like they don't get caught up in so many of the to be frank, the red tape issues that really, I think, plague listed companies these days. So I've given you a minute to think.
Well, it's interesting because I think, Peter, you and I come from very similar backgrounds. I mean, in terms of grandparents who were Russian immigrants and very, very entrepreneurial because they had to be. You know, they came out in a time. In fact, I actually listened to a podcast today about pogroms in the Ukraine, 1918 to 1921, which is absolutely fascinating. And that was the world that our grandparents inhabited, and they came out here and had to survive and had to be able to feed their families, and they took risks, and you know, some things failed and some things succeeded, and I think that it's really interesting, you know, the conversations that you have around a dinner table when, you know, people are entrepreneurial and are risk-taking, and, you know, and how that sort of cascades down through the generations. But I'll tell you something very funny quickly. So we have 4 children, none of whom are involved in our businesses. And our eldest daughter worked for the Victorian government for 10 years. I mean, I said to her when she took a job she's actually a lawyer, but her husband's a doctor, and she would go to work every day as a lawyer, and she came home one day and she said, you know, Hayden goes to work and saves lives, and I go to work and ruin lives. And so she then
She went into government?
Yeah, she went into the government, and she absolutely loves it because she loves policy. And she believes that if governments have good policy, then we as citizens benefit from that. And but I have to say, I said to her, do you know what? We haven't had, I don't know anyone who's worked in government, particularly from our family, probably since Joseph worked for Pharaoh. So, you know, it was very, very strange for us.
I mean, I would certainly agree with Carol in that what makes us successful today is what we often reflecting on the past, and sort of those lessons learned. Certainly from a Victor Smorgon Group point of view, we've found, and our family, you know, one in the same really. to be honest. But we found that sticking together, strength in numbers, being able to have a conversation and then being able to have a not the nicest conversation and then still have dinner together. Again, I think I would credit as the success of the business, because if you don't have that basis, then every other discussion post that is always not really about the discussion you're having. It's about the reason you couldn't have dinner together. And in fact, Philip Brass, when we were sort of just establishing the family business, post the divestment of SCI, and Victor and I were sitting there looking at each other saying, we've got to get everyone involved. Philip Brass said to me that he'd been involved in families for a long time, and his number one job description was to make sure that the family could have Shabbat dinner together.
Okay.
And I guess from my perspective, I've tried to certainly encourage that through us for the last sort of 26 years, and the ability to be entrepreneurial and the ability to take risks is really based on your ability to take your stakeholders along with you and communicate where you're going and the risks you're taking, and that doesn't have to be in business speak. That can just be in general conversation. And so I certainly would credit that with our success.
Yeah. Okay. I think
Thank you. Wow.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Damon, Carol, Peter, for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your time, for sharing your love to young people, and empowering young people. I just want to say that I was just reminded of a story that I wanted to say. Carol may or may not remember this, but it's a quite funny story, and I think it's worthwhile sharing. So when I asked Carol to speak for a Friday night dinner, talking about Friday night dinners, so Carol wrote me an email and says, I just want to make sure, I want you to know that I wear pants. I said, that is fantastic, as I do also. So.
And then I asked Moshe what his pronouns were.
And if you're confused, I'm...
Rabbi.
Yeah. But Damon, you touch upon philanthropy. I could attest the extraordinary philanthropy of the families that are, the Victor Smorgon group, the extended Beeson family. It's quite extraordinary, and you guys are extraordinary people. Thank you, Damon, for coming. We've got this little certificates. You should always remember your talk over here. So to Damon. I think it's in order without even trying. Carol and Peter. Thank you. And I just want to say to all of you, I loved, Peter, you said about Friday night dinners, right? And one of the things we have right over there, Shabbat Shmooze, we have it coming up in 2 weeks. We have beautiful Shabbat dinners together. I can tell you, my dear wife, she just left, but she was in the back over there. Best cook in Melbourne. Forgive me if anybody else considers their wife to be the best cook. Come anytime. I cook with her, by the way. I just want you to know. It's a partnership.
She makes great challah.
She does. Yeah. She does make great challah. Please come, reach out. We'd love to have you for Shabbat. Yossi and Ricky would love to have you for Shabbat. Come to our events. Get involved. Shabbat dinner is really what brings us together. Tonight brings us together, and Shabbat has a different dynamic of bringing us together. So thank you for coming. Stick around. There's more food. Feel free to ask questions. I'm sure you all had a lot of questions. There were some property developers who wanted to ask questions before. Maybe we're a bit shy, but come on up, guys. Thank you. Enjoy. Take your book with you, and we'll see you all at the next YGP event. Thank you.
Yeah, we could have gone for an hour. That's right. We were just warming up.
I feel like you two have so many questions for each other.
No, I've done so many of these things. That's so much better.
Okay.